Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. I am Gabriella Di Laccio. I am the founder and curator of Donne, Women in Music, and our main focus is normally women in music, but also in inclusion and diversity. And that's why we're having many different types of conversation in this channel. It's so helpful for me as well I keep learning as the leader of this project. And first of all, I want to thank all of our panelists for making the time, for being here today with me and with all of us. Ché, Kathleen, and Andrea, I would love for each of you to say who you are. But before that, all this conversation started because somehow they're all related to the fourth choir. And the fourth choir became one of our ambassadors in March 2021. And it has been really nice to have this conversation with all of them and to have this collaboration as well. And we are learning in both ways, as a project and as an organization and performers as well. So I'm going to start here with Ché, because you're here on the top. Hi, Ché.
Hi, Gabriella. My name is Ché. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am a choir member, a soprano with the fourth choir.
Thank you. Kathleen?
I'm Kathleen Holman, and I use the pronouns she and her. And I'm a web designer by day. And then by the evening, I have a passion for choral singing. And I'm one of the co-founders of the fourth choir, which I started back in 2013.
I didn't know you were a web designer. Andrea.
Hello, apologies for the noise. That's my dog trying to get in. I'm so sorry. I'm Andrea Brown. I'm a choral conductor, and I'm also head of choral conducting at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama. I also sit on the EDI, that's the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team, as part of the college. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Andrea, I'm so sorry I was calling you in my Andrea Italian Brazilian pronunciation. I'm sorry. Andrea. So welcome all. I think the first point we would like to start talking, and that's for all of you. So inclusivity in choirs. So why is this important? I know it's a silly question, but it's nice to think about it. Why is it important? And I was having a conversation with Tia and Lester a couple of weeks ago, and then it's amazing, you know, the things you learn that you never thought about it, from clothes you would like to wear or the voices you would like to sing, and that people don't really think about. I would love to hear from each one of you. What?
Sure. I mean, let's set a context first, because every single choir is already a demographic or a village, right? They always have some kind of like boundary for who they are and what they're doing. And it might be a literal village. It might be the choir from a literal village, or an office, or you have military wives, or it might be music style or type of musicianship. So there's always this framework that every choir operates on. So it's not about like letting everyone into your choir. It's not about including everybody. So, but I think what it means is that from this village that you decided is your people, your village, what you're aiming to be, everyone from that village is included. So it's not like, and we differentiate, I mean, I'm differentiating inclusion from diversity here because it's not necessarily visible diversity. So from a particular group of people, there might not be visible diversity. And equally, like, many choirs can never achieve that, right? They'll always look similar, but and even visibly diverse choirs can have blind spots on inclusion. So inclusion is really a broad area, and it's every choir will have a different spectrum, and that it's really important that they get it right. So it's in terms of inclusion, that's something that you can start today. Like, inclusion is a process, you can start it today. Whereas aiming for like diversity can be checkboxing or stereotyping. Inclusion is also, diversity is the outcome, and inclusion is your mindset, and it's very broad. And I don't think you can do it without learning about it, right? I think it requires education and a really active process. And it really requires that you have structures in place. So that's kind of like the context that before we go into why it's important, I just wanted to make that clear. Andrea, you had your hand up.
I did. Sorry, I don't know if we're doing hands up or things like that. No, I just wanted. I agree with you, Kathleen. I think, you know, just looking very broadly, choral singing is a real part of our of who we are. It's one of the things that makes us human, and you know, everyone, you know, in my head, everyone should have the right to the right to sing in a choir or sing in a group or sing in, you know, whatever context they would like. Now, what does that look like in reality? Well, actually, you know, as Kathleen says, they are organized groups of people. It's, I think, the job of the groups of those people, the MD, whoever is organising the structure, if you like, to ensure that the space is as inclusive as possible, primarily because you're wanting to attract singers, or indeed a flow of singers, or indeed audience, or indeed profile that is going to have some appeal to the rest of society, unless you are wanting just to sing by yourself in a closed room. So really, you know, it's and particularly in this day and age, particularly what has happened recently with Black Lives Matter, and I know we're here to also to talk about the Fourth Choir and what they do. So we're talking also about LGBT plus rather, and so, you know, it's I think inclusivity really is really at everyone's, you know, the top of what we should consider in when we come to making up and putting on a choir.
And I think if choirs are not inclusive, they eventually start to wane. More people leave than join.
Yes, and let's realize this. This is about singing, and you know, if choirs of, you know, we're wanting our singers to feel safe and included, and actually, you know, the idea of singing anyway is about self-expression, isn't it, really? Mm-hmm. So, you know, in order for people to express themselves, even within a choral context, they need to feel safe and included.
Absolutely.
And I think sorry, Ché. And I think the word here is action, because everybody uses, oh, I'm a feminist, or I'm not racist, or of course we are inclusive, but it requires a regular checkup, isn't it, from the person wanting this to happen for a group. And I think that's what we miss sometimes in organizations, because it's not like, oh yes, of course we're inclusive, but how? Ché, you.
No, exactly. That's such a good point, and I think something that we as the Fourth Choir have reckoned with and continuously reckoned with over the last few years, but it was something that was definitely thrown into relief last summer after the murder of George Floyd, and with the Black Lives Matter movement really coming into popular consciousness again. And I think, you know, especially when you're part of a community and a marginalized community, you know, we are an LGBT plus choir, it can be easy to slip into thinking, oh, inclusion, we know what that is. And as Andrea says, it's really important that we continually challenge ourselves, that we remain open, that we're listening, that we're being kind of true to ourselves and to our values. And that is something which is active and requires constant reflection and learning. There's a lovely Maya Angelou quote, which is, do the best you can until you know better, and then do better. And I think that's something which, especially over, you know, since 2018, 2019, when we really started interrogating actively what inclusion means to us as a choir, we've been trying to do better. And it's a continuous learning process and a journey. So, you know, we're not there yet, and we never will be.
That's it. I think the more important that we have to keep learning, all of us. Okay, it feels like for the people watching who don't know the fourth choir, I think that's the time we tell the story. So Kathleen, I think you're the one who should talk about this because you're one of the founders. So what happened? What made you, were you singing in another choir before? Did you want to sing? What drove the passion to start this wonderful new choir?
Yeah, so there were several reasons that I did it, and it was a long process. It took me about 10 years to get to the place where I was ready to do it. And there was my experience in the choral scene, there was the collective LGBT experience in the wider choral scene, and then there was my experiences in the audience of choral music, those sort of things. So I was singing in lots of choirs. I've been singing in an LGBT choir called Diversity Choir with Andrea, and also several chamber choirs. Well, it's hard to know what to call these choirs because they're not LGBT choirs, but you can't really say they're not. They're like, I would just call them advanced chamber a cappella groups. And I felt like both choirs had something to offer. They were excelling in a certain area, but both were missing something for me. And in the LGBT choir, there is a great sense of community and family. The community in the LGBT world is something to behold, really. It's like, wonderful. But they were just doing a couple of concerts a year. And as a musician, I was not challenged by that. So I was singing in other choirs, these other chamber choirs, and they would do like 4 to 8 weeks of prep for a concert. And then, so they would do like 6 to 12 concerts a year, and they would fantastic opportunities because of that. But I never experienced the same sense of community, which I wanted. And I think there was lots of reasons for that. One of them was that in many of them, the relationships between the members are established at university. And so it's a continuation of that. So if you're not from those universities, it's hard to get a wedge in. Some of them are heteronormative. Some are project-based. So people just want to show up and sing, and they don't want that. I wanted it, but they don't want it. So, I just decided there's these two things, the best of both. Can I combine the best of all these into one? Is there a market for that for other people like me? And so I guess I believed that. The second thing was, the LGBT community has always been underrepresented in the classical scene profoundly. And I was singing in a retrospective of John Tavner in 2003. This is where the whole thing started. And I had a light bulb moment because, you wouldn't expect John Tavner to be like particularly connected to the LGBT movement at all, right? I'm not expecting that at all. But I just realized that this was another event where there was nothing referencing the LGBT experience or acknowledging or supporting her. I had a fantasy that there was a retrospective of someone with the caliber of Tavner. I had this fantasy. I was in this concert, and there was a song in there that spoke to the LGBT experience. I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful? I put it away because I thought this will never happen. And then in 2010, I was in Diversity Choir, and we're a gay choir, and we put ourselves forward to do a concert at the Bernstein Festival in a secular venue. And Bernstein's a gay composer. We're a gay choir, and the festival was led by Maren Alsop. Wow, the stars have aligned. But it was so disappointing because we were not allowed to acknowledge his homosexuality in the programming. And at that point, I said, there's just this huge gap, and the community of classical music feels we're a blight, or we're shameful, or there's something that we can't bring, and we're not being accepted, and we're not allowed in. So that was the biggest thing for me. And the response to this rejection that the LGBT groups have had, the choirs have had, like historically, is they've pulled inwards, and some of them have refused to sing classical music. Right? They've created these wonderful festivals. They're a huge amount of fun, like Various Voices. They are spectacular events, but they're essentially an inward focused experience for the community. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but I just thought there has to be a choir that is a full participant in this wider classical scene that's not here primarily for the LGBT community. It's about being included. Not so much about being exclusive, but us being included. So that's always been like the driving thing that we've been trying to do as a choir. Am I talking too much? Because I could talk
No,
about.
no, go.
Right.
But then when did it finally start? And then tell us about your name, because I think it's important for the people who don't know why you're called the Fourth Choir to understand that part as well.
Sure. So, I mean, the one last thing that I wanted to say was that I started going to choir concerts in 2012 before I started it in 2013. And I went to 30 concerts in a year. I went to all the big name choral groups, and it was like a lot of concerts. And I observed, I wanted to learn. And what was the eye opener there is I saw concerts regularly. I saw concerts there where there were more people in the choir than in the audience, and threadbare audiences. And this is like, I realized this has to change. We can't go out there and be a choir that does that. We can't afford it. We have to promote all our own concerts. We have to raise funds for a music director this has to change. So this was a final motivation. And I haven't done anything beyond that, because it's really attributed all the programming, all the great ideas to other people in the choir who've joined up and believe this vision too. But the name is, it's hard to name a choir, so we really needed it to be in English. And we toyed with this for about 6 months of how to name it. And so our kind of, our Hildegard von Bingen is like, one of the foremost women composers in history, who is, we believe, lesbian as well. And she had 3 choirs in heaven, and we decided that we're her 4th choir on earth.
That's great. I love that. Well, so when did the choir start officially?
2013.
2013. So thank you so much, Kathleen. Are all the members of the choir LGBT?
No, I mean, we have quite a few people who I don't always know the numbers, because it's not something that but we have plenty of allies in the choir as well, people that want to be there. And that's exciting for us, because it means, it's kind of like being an inversion of acceptance. We have to be the ones now that reach out and accept them. And, they have to experience being the different ones. But I think it's so rewarding for me to have people come along who want to fly the flag with us. Yeah. And we can affirm them and they affirm us. And I think that's really, really fantastic.
And I'm sure it's wonderful for them as well, because it certainly opens their eyes to things that you would never think before. And I think now comes to the next question. So how do you make a choral space inclusive? What kind of things you effectively do? And Andrea and Ché, not that you can't answer, Kathleen, but I'm just going to let them
too much talking.
Do you want to go first, Ché? I don't mind.
Well, I was going to say you're the expert.
No, I don't.
I can fill in any gaps.
No, you go first.
Well, I think that, look, firstly, what we say in the 4th choir is that you're auditioned on your voice. So your gender identity, that is not something which is taken into consideration when you're auditioning. And we don't use that we will refer to upper voices and lower voices, and we'll refer to voice parts rather than like, oh, ladies, please could you do this, which, like, in any case, I just find really patronizing. But I think that was something I remember when I was reading the documents for the choir. It was like, you're here for your voice, and we accept who you are, and your voice is like, foremost. That's what you'll be judged. Judged is the wrong word, but like that's what we're accepting into this space. And whatever part you're singing and how that aligns like with who you are, that is just accepted. And I think that, for me, that was a real awakening. I didn't, I'm cisgender, but it was suddenly like such a transformative experience for me, being in a space where actually it's like, oh, our voices are what's important here because we're in a choir. And actually realizing that it was inclusive and affirming for me as a cisgender person, also not to be referred to by my voice part and not by some preconception of you know, looking at me and deciding, you know, how I fit in or don't, and actually being taken seriously on the basis of your voice and what you're contributing to the choir, you know, is a very different experience, regardless, I think, of your gender or your gender identity, or it certainly has been for me as a cisgender person. And, you know, I think that that's something that any choir can learn from the fourth choir, and would just increase the caliber of music and musician, for any choir. The other thing I think is that the British choral music world is an exclusive place. And these are discussions that we really had last year as a choir over Zoom about, you know, when we were thinking about Black Lives Matter and how we can be a more inclusive choir. Like for me, I have mixed ethnic heritage, and being in an LGBT choir was like so important to me as a gay woman. But I didn't really think about the cross, you know, our whiteness as a space. And we started talking about like, well, we're probably quite reflective of the British choral world, but is that good? You know, that's not good enough, and we can't hide behind that. So I think really then going back to our values and saying, well, you know, who are we, and how do we fit in, and how can we be a more welcoming and inclusive place, and how can we ensure that, you know, when people look at us and access us and come to our concerts, that they're not, you know, just seeing one experience of what it means to be part of the LGBT plus community. So I think that like audience facing thing is also really important. So there's like the judging people on their voices, being inclusive on the basis of our voices, which any choir can do, and also making sure that we're inclusive in terms of the audiences that we're bringing in, and that then hopefully transforming our own spaces internally as well.
Andrea.
Gosh, you've kind of just said it really. No, I mean, completely agree. I think in terms of making choirs more inclusive, I mean, yes, you need to think about the membership, the audience, the artistic aims of the choir itself. There are ways that choirs can be more inclusive, and it might be around commissioning, it might be around venues, it might be around the MD's own art, perhaps having guest MDs or choice of MD. When I say MD, I mean musical director here, and so that, or soloists or artists that choirs can work with, partnerships with other organisations. So that there's a whole kind of range of ways that choirs can and can be more inclusive without necessarily costing more, like financially. I mean, there are things, because of course one possibly might want to think about that as well, but within one's own membership, I think it probably does start there, as you've said, Ché.
And there's things like making sure that you don't require people to pay a certain amount of money, like, leave it completely voluntarily.
Yeah.
Donation only, no questions asked, accessible rehearsal spaces. So those kinds of things, which are not what you necessarily have in the listing.
Do you face any challenges from audiences? That's a silly question, but just have you ever?
We have performed. So I would say sometimes audiences turn up to our concerts because they are members of the LGBT community. And I think at times in the past, we have not been inclusive, as inclusive as we should have been, of transgender audience members, particularly non-binary audience members. So I think we've discovered that our role as an LGBT plus choir is to work with our venues and to say to our venues, you need to have accessible toilets. We need a gender neutral toilet as part of this venue. And we didn't always do that, and that's something that we learned. And I'm sorry that some of our audience members had that experience, because coming to an LGBT plus concert, they should have expected an inclusive space that is there for them in their fullness. And But on the kind of flip side, we've also performed to audiences who were there for the venue, because they've got a link with the venue. So for example, one of our Powerful and Dangerous concerts, which we did, was about women through history, self-identifying women through history. And we performed one of them at Charterhouse, and a lot of the Charterhouse community turned up to the concert. And they were not, I mean, they were there for the concert. I don't think they were expecting an LGBT plus choir. And I think it was very interesting for them. It was a lot of older white men at the concert. I think it was like demographically, it was probably the most homogenous audience we've ever had. And they didn't I mean, there was no challenge from them or saying like, what are you doing? But I think, and they really enjoyed the concert. But I'm not sure it's what they were expecting. And actually, I really enjoyed that experience because it was like, here we are bringing our community to this space. And of course, there will be LGBT plus people in that group. And, you know, it felt really nice that we were able to like bring our space to them and also like invite them to be part of our community for that night. So yeah, it wasn't a challenge, but it was a different experience.
Yeah, and I think it's like, it's music, right? So I have a challenge, and I would love to hear your opinion, because within Donne, there are many women who actually don't even like to be called women composers, and I totally understand, because why would you have to be called a woman composer? And then you start adding things, a Black woman composer or a Black gay woman composer. And I understand, and I always have this dilemma of how can we be inclusive without tagging people with those labels. But at the same time, there's a lot of awareness that we need to raise to educate people in the nicest way possible, to make them understand that there is a vast repertoire, there's a vast number of artists that are not getting to be heard, full stop. It's kind of, the decision makers are making the decisions, as silly as it sounds, to what is heard by audiences. And I'm talking the big decision makers, the radio stations, the big concert halls. And then I'm always learning, because I think the best, this is now what I'm deciding to do, is to respect, and as much as I can, going almost like one by one, when I add a new composer, asking, would you like to be added to the Black and Asian tick box as well, in case people want to find? But what do you think of this situation? Because having an LGBT choir is amazing as well, but do you think you can also be judged by that? Is a physiological question.
I think it's an interesting question, particularly with my recent experience of working on behalf of women conductors. And this labeling, is it women conductors or just conductors? But I think I think it depends on the context. I remember probably about 4 years ago, quite a well-known organisation who I'm not going to name has an annual composition prize for new work. And they decided to also just have another prize for women composers. And what was extraordinary is that in their main competition, they hardly had any women, and they, applying year after year after year after year for this main prize. But this other prize that was specifically for women composers was absolutely filled with applications. Now, I don't know what that tells us, overall, but I think what it does show that there are lots of women composers out there. And, if that's the start of how we start getting them heard, well, then we'll do that, and then we'll follow that up and say, and encourage and encourage them to, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, at the moment, I think it's important that we do offer opportunities in areas that we feel that are underrepresented.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also thinking about, representation and oppression works on lots of different levels. And I completely feel the desire to be seen as, I'm a professional first, and this is what I do. I want you to see me as, as a composer or as a, as a singer. I don't need like these additional labels attached, and it starts to kind of might feel like a devaluing of your work. But, we're also living and existing and performing and writing in a society where structural oppression means that the visibility of women or of Black, Asian, minoritized ethnic people who are in the global majority, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Women
let's call them the global majority. Absolutely.
But it's ridiculous that our structures mean that people who are in the global majority are not, and and in fact LGBT plus people might also be included in that. If we look at like more recent statistics, we're not very, very minority group. Actually I think young people, something like close to 50% identify as LGBT plus. So I think while we have these structural issues in place that means that recognition isn't possible on the same level, then actually identifying, making yourself visible in different ways might not feel empowering for yourself. Personally, I find it empowering, but it can be empowering for your whole community. So it's kind of bigger than the individual, and the effect that it has is bigger than the effect on the individual.
Kathleen, I don't know if you say something. No.
I think you do. I mean, you have to get bigger. You have to get forces together. That's as a choir, we can do a lot more than by joining up and labeling ourselves, right, whatever, than we could as individuals in different choirs scattered around. So I think it's a difficult question, but I think yes, labels are a noose around our neck, but at the same time, they're the way that we can change things.
Yeah. Do you do any reaching out programs that you actually try to go to people and bring them to your choir, to the more Black people or more Asian people? I'm gonna go back to this just because I'm so connected with this research I'm doing, and the percentage of Black and Asians in some cases is 0, and in the overall is sort of something like 1%. And then the challenge we have is less people, of course, are going for this profession anyway, or they're not encouraged. And I think this is something I'm learning, because I think when I started Donne 3 years ago, you feel so proud of doing something for your community, in my case as a woman, and then the more you learn, it was almost like when I start having singing lessons. I really thought I could sing, and then you start having singing lessons, you go, I don't think I can do this. And progressively you just think, oh, it's so hard. And then the more the years pass, I go, oh my God, I have so much more to learn, I have so much more to do, because I can't just be a white woman. Even though I am a woman, I suffered prejudice. I am a foreigner here, of course I suffered prejudice for that. But now I have to be very conscious that, who am I promoting? Am I really looking for finding more women who are not receiving the attention, or am I just going for whoever appears in my easily in front of me? And that's a challenge, because there are thousands and thousands of women composers, but less thousands and thousands of Black and Asian and ethnic minority composers. And I think I see as my job to try and do my best to find the ones and amplify the work they're doing somehow. And is that something you guys do as well?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about doing that in our commissioning program. In terms of our membership, not so much, because I don't think we necessarily know like where to target members that are not white to say, but I mean, luckily we don't need professionals in that space. None of us are like professional soloists or anything. So we do have some Asians. We don't have Blacks at the moment. One of the co-founders was a Black man. So the choir was actually co-founded by me and Francis Nwokedi, who's a Black man. So there was, you know, in the beginning, this intention, but I don't personally know where to recruit Black choral singers that would want to be in our choir. And that's the difficulty. So we don't target. I think we just have to be, we have to do what we can. It might be in programming. It might be in concert content. And it's not just about the music we sing, but how we sing it and where we sing it and how we program it and what we talk about.
Andrea.
I think, it's Kathleen, you're not, the fourth choir are not alone in this. I think this is a very large question that a lot of choirs and choral societies, both amateur and indeed professional in the UK are discussing. How do we increase a percentage of ethnicity within our, and I'm speaking particularly about ethnicity within our choirs, and it is a complex question because a lot of it has to do with where the choirs are situated, where they rehearse, what the actual landscape is within their local area in terms of ethnicity and different for people, and also how much music is being taught at schools, how much of singing is particularly in choirs, and particularly if it's a specific type of repertoire that the choir is looking at. All of that, those are questions, although I must say they are questions that do need to be asked, because there are things that, these are things even that higher education establishments are asking themselves. Is our program diverse enough? Are we featuring enough diverse composers? What do our tutors and our educators and our senior managers are we showing a real diversity across that, so our leadership looks diverse as well as our members as well. So it's not that it's an unobtainable answer, but it's a very big question, and it's I think because of George Floyd and the sort of increase of Black Lives Matter, particularly in this last few years, I think larger organizations are starting to really develop these things. And when things like funding and all that kind of thing, it suddenly becomes dependent on that, as it should, one can really make some very positive change.
Yeah, I think it does start in school and also in the family, because in choirs like ours, we have to be able to sight read music, which is effectively a language we've learned right prior to coming to the choir. And that language is learned through music lessons, private music lessons, singing in choirs, being in the right school. So we're experiencing the knock-on effect of that being, happening much earlier in the educational world.
Yeah, I would say though that we know, we rehearse, we're almost back to properly rehearsing again in London. We know that choral music is, yes, it's a very middle class. In the UK, the kind of choral singing that we do is very middle class, but there are plenty of middle class Black people with with the ability to read music, to sight sing, who are singing at and are above our level. And something that we've never needed to do any kind of targeted recruitment as a choir. People have kind of come to us. Sometimes we might say, oh, we need some more tenors. And that will go out in the groups that we so we've actually never thought about targeted recruitment before. And last year, when we did really start discussing this properly, I think we recognized that firstly, we do need to think about targeted recruitment, and we're not at the stage of recruiting properly yet, obviously, but also that we need to really take a good hard look at ourselves internally and say, well, what is it about our space which is not currently inclusive, and what can we do? And that can only be done through internal reflection. And you know, and once I would, like, I think my worst nightmare would be for us to create to do a whole recruitment drive and then bring people into a space which is actually not safe for them. You know, Andrea spoke so eloquently at the start about how important it is as singers that we feel safe when we're, you know, really expressing something from the core of us, and it's core to our values that we are a safe space. So, you know, I'm not saying that we're not necessarily, it's just something that we actually need to properly reflect on before we do that kind of targeted outreach work, make sure that we're not doing more harm than good inadvertently.
And I think that's a great advice for all of us as musicians as well, you know, in terms of learning how to be more inclusive. You know, start self-reflecting first and paying attention and checking our own privileges, I guess, in terms of all the things that we have in our lives that we don't have to deal with, you know. And I think I might have to deal with the fact I'm a woman and a foreigner, but people don't judge for the color of my skin. There's not that. So I think the more we start, as you said, Ché, reflecting and thinking about things carefully and with a lot of respect, it's the same thing we were talking with CN, you know. I can't even start to understand half of the experience they have to go through, but the moment is I am familiar with, and you respect, and you go, oh my God, I need to start thinking about this in everything I do as a performer, as a musician. And I think, can we talk a little bit about commissioning though, because this is something that is quite, I don't know about you, but in my musical education, I didn't get much encouragement on collaboration when I was doing my degree and my master's. It was very little suggestion from, you know, people saying to me, oh, why don't you collaborate with people, collaborate with composers? We were always searching for repertoire, but very little. And then the other day, I was talking to a director who wants to perform this piece, and then he was, but we need to find a poem by this person. And I said, I can't find it. And then I said, hold on a minute, call the composer. So can you write a piece about this and this? And then she said, oh yes, I can do that. It's written. And I was like, why did I didn't do that before? So you guys been doing that now. So would you like to, because I think that's, it's a powerful way, isn't it? You can ask people to tell a story with music, and that story will come with a chosen experience that you can actually give like a brief. Oh, shut up. Kathleen, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I mean, that's one of the things that we've been doing. And so, I mean, there's two sides of that from our point of view. One is that we want the choral lexicon in, you know, to have a body of work that's about LGBT relevant topics, like poems from the past that have been banned in the past, like Sappho or Strato, great poets that were never put into music. And also poets like, you know, Walt Whitman, any underrepresented poets, including women, you know, we want to do that. So that's been one of our big, you know, quests really to do that. And it's not so much that we want to support LGBT composers, women, and any underrepresented composers. But, you know, one of our composers we have a 3-year program where we have a composer is actually Alexander Kampkin, who's a straight man, but a fantastic ally from the beginning. He came to the choir from the beginning to support us. And we picked him just because we thought he was a prominent up and coming young composer who would someday be the John Tavner of the future, who would have a retrospective where we would have a poem by Sappho or by Strato included in his, you know, life's work. And that would be, you know, a legacy. So that's one of it. That's one of the way we approach it. We also approach it supporting composers that are underrepresented.
And that has, well, sort of happened. So one of the first compositions that he did for us was a poem by Sappho, Unleash the Beauty of Your Eyes. I'm right. That's right, isn't it,
Yeah,
Kathleen?
yeah. So that's
okay. And
yeah,
that
exactly.
was picked for an international choral competition. So you had choirs from all around the world performing this poem by Sappho, Sapphic love poem. And it's amazing to see, you can look it up on YouTube, and there are people all around the world singing this Sapphic love poem. So I think the decision that Kathleen made and colleagues made at the beginning has already started coming into fruition, in terms of just bringing that work featuring LGBT plus experiences, into the mainstream. And it's beautiful to think about young people, wherever in the world they are, taking part in this choral competition, and might see that experience or might look Sappho up and be like, whoa, that's amazing. That's and relate to it is a really wonderful thing.
Exactly. It's like a little seed that you plant, a seed of curiosity, and that can take people to many places. Andrea, and well, all of you, but that type of, I don't know if you know that, but that type of situation that Kathleen was describing, that we would not be able, if you're in a festival, you would not be able to name your choir as a LGBT choir. Can this still happen today? I mean, how is the?
I think it depends what country.
In this country,
really,
let's look at this country.
But in the UK, I wouldn't like to say, but I would expect not. I think if a choir says it's LGBT, I think in this country people will say it's an LGBT plus choir. So no, but don't quote me. I mean, I don't know. I hope not.
A lot has changed.
Really. A lot has changed, and actually, a lot has changed even in the last decade. I mean, and continues to change, thankfully.
Yeah. Thankfully. And we sing in a lot of churches, and they've always been inclusive. We focus on churches, Anglican churches, where we know that they're inclusive, and there's even people that reach out to us to bring us in because they want us to be there. So I think we just maybe avoid where there could be controversy. And so I don't know. I don't think we would do, an evangelical church, for example. But we've never had any issues with the churches that we've chosen. They've been so welcoming.
Ché, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we didn't sing in a church in Rome, but we did when we were in Rome and we took part in a Pride March. I'm remembering because I think it was just the anniversary recently. And it was, I think, a year after we had performed in Amsterdam as part of an LGBT plus choral music festival with Andrea conducting us. And there was an Italian men's choir who spoke about how amazing it was to see churches flying the rainbow flag in Amsterdam, and how sad it was for them that wouldn't happen in Catholic churches at home. And so actually kind of going to Rome the next year and being there and being visibly LGBT plus, like, yes, not in a church, but taking part in Pride, it's a good reminder, I think, for us, and also, for our international community, that we're standing together and, we're there for each other.
I can't believe it's 5 to 6. If anybody has a question, please write that. But I would like to ask you all if you could give each one of you an advice to other choir directors or to other choirs members who maybe never thought about that and might watch this interview, of how can they make their spaces more inclusive. It doesn't have to, inclusive, full stop. No, what kind of advice would you give? What kind of things you would suggest they could think about to improve?
I think primarily that the inclusivity is about including. So it's not just to say, oh, we're inclusive, we're a friendly bunch here, but actually it is actively including people, whether that's membership or whether it's programming, whether it's slightly including different venue spaces, trying out different venue spaces. It might not be the church, could be site specific. Commissions with particular composers, or as the fourth choir so successfully did with a composer, and also new and wonderful text, new poets and old poets too. So yes, but it is about including, for me. And that might be a little bit about finding younger groups and working with them, and to help them know about us or whoever, and then come into our choir. So it's more active than just being we're a friendly bunch.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I would have said the same thing. I will say on top of that, make sure you have structures for inclusion embedded in the fabric of your choir. And that means educating yourself what that means. And that means maybe appointing safeguarding officers, communication routes that go back to the leadership. Just make sure it's part of your structure, and really enabling everyone to bring their whole selves to the choir. So the skills that people have, that they can bring that, their knowledge that they have, every side of their lives, that they can bring that to the choir. Because it's not just a choir, it's also a community.
Absolutely. I just wholeheartedly agree with everything Andrea and Kathleen has said. I think that, and if you want people to bring their whole selves, I think, you need to also have like a degree of openness. People who are more long-standing members of the choir, people who are in leadership roles, whether they're an MD or founding member, whatever that is, actually having that openness themselves, and making it clear that is encouraged, and you encourage people to be there in their wholeness. And yeah, I think also inviting feedback from your choir members regularly, and having like really open feedback channels. That's something I've really appreciated about the fourth choir. We do kind of anonymous feedback. I think it used to be maybe termly or annually. I can't remember now, Kathleen, but it's led to us becoming a better choir and a more inclusive choir.
Yeah, we do surveys, regular surveys.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. And I think, as Ché said before, don't call us ladies and gentlemen, and don't force some trousers or skirts. I think those are very, very silly, basic things that I was even telling my husband, saying, "Did you know that?" And he was like, "What?" And it's true. It's true that people can really go into uncomfortable situations by trying to express, or their hair, or what they're wearing in more uptight working spaces in the music industry. And I think that's something all of us can also be aware, and also try to help our colleagues. I think that's what I learned the most. Pay attention, and always be aware as well what's happening in a rehearsal, in a situation. If you see some people feeling uncomfortable, I think my job now is always to speak up and not be quiet if I see a situation that is pretty much looking uncomfortable to somebody as well. I don't know if I don't see any questions, but I have my final question to all of you then, because we need to talk about women a little bit as well. And it's not it's not a tricky question. It's really because I felt really ignorant when I discovered so many women composers in the history of music, and I just wanted to ask each one of you if you were aware of this huge amount of music by women that already exists, or when did you become aware of this? Because for me it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I just wish it was 20 years ago. Because it feels really wrong that we spend. I have a colleague who is a pianist, and she's only playing music by women now, and she said, well, half of my career I played only music by men. Now I think I'm just going to play music by women because I have a lot to catch up. And we don't want to exclude all the men in terms of repertoire at all, but I just, as of my curiosity, ending question, if knowing Donne, what did you discover, and what was your highlight, I don't know, in terms of women in music?
Who was
Andrea? Yes. Sorry, I should.
That's a really good question, actually, because I've had, well, I don't know if it's traditional, but I went to music college, and I in fact I first studied as a singer at college, and got into early music and did early music. I think as my final part of my singing degree, and I think it's there that I suddenly thought, oh goodness me, there's this wonderful composer called Barbara Strozzi, and Barbara, well, that sounds female. And yes, I'd sort of heard of Clara Schumann, and I sort of, oh, she just does piano pieces, and then I think probably through doing early music, I suddenly discovered people like Elizabeth Jacqueline de la Guerre, and then realized, actually, hang on, there aren't just women composers in the Baroque and the Renaissance there throughout, and there's just this huge canon of work that is completely unrecognized and completely, it's there. It sometimes has to be researched, but it is there. And I think it was back in the early noughties, there was a thin volume that came out which was called Women Composers, and which was I think the first book that was specifically on an encyclopedia of women composers, and it was literally really thin volume. I think probably my interest certainly in women composers probably grew from that, and just thinking, this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Good, I'm not alone.
Definitely not alone.
So
well, I mean,
I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I'm not a music director or music professional or musicologist, so I'm not in this place to choose repertoire. But I mean, we do what I think I'm the kind of looking after the library a bit, and we have about 10% of the music that we've done by women composers. And since we do a cappella, I've also cataloged everything and looked at the dates of all the music we've done. Because we do a cappella, we do a lot of early music and a lot of contemporary music, and there's a bit threadbare in the middle. And I think that might be why it's harder to find women composers in this a cappella space, because we don't use pianos, and so we don't use orchestras except very rarely, twice in our history we use orchestras. So I don't know if that's the cause. I'd really be interested to find out if our space of a cappella music has any women in between the current time and the early time, when the early time seems to be quite devoid of women, apart from Barbara Strozzi, with who we have sung. But we do use a lot of contemporary living women composers. That's the main source of where we get music from for women. And the issue with that is just the cost. So we can't do a concert of only contemporary music because it's about $2,000 for a concert of only living composers. Yeah. So those are the issues that we've got. But yeah, it would be great to do more. And that's a goal we have, to explore that.
So I'm embarrassingly, my undergraduate degree was in English language and literature, and it was a very traditional course and predominantly men. And obviously, as a young woman, I was like, this is ridiculous. Where are all the women? And was really into finding more about, especially because women were the main readers of literature. Where are they represented in, and what were women reading that we're just not learning about now? And I never applied this to music, so despite having that ability to do it for one discipline, I never thought about it in terms of music. And it was really through being in the fourth choir, working with people like Andrea, with our previous MD, Dominic Ellis-Peckham, who introduced us to repertoire by women, particularly contemporary women, of course, Hildegard von Bingen. But I had a very interesting experience when we were putting on the Powerful and Dangerous concert, and researching different women, and I wasn't looking at the music side of things really. I was looking at inspirational women, and one of the women who we were looking into, she was Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, and she was a Mexican nun in the mid 17th century, And I was interested in her because of her really interesting life story. And she's like this complete rebel. Like, we love a rebellious nun in the fourth choir anyway. And we then sang one of her compositions because, as well as being a writer, she was a composer. So yeah, just kind of that being open to, you know, just finding these paths to different women composers, I think has been something that the choir's really opened up for me. And I'm ashamed to say I might not have done that on my own. Certainly not a few years ago. I might only be coming to it now.
No, but don't be ashamed, because I think we were all ashamed at some point. But I also, you know, we all love this art so much, and but I've been going to concerts all my life, and I never questioned the concert programs, even though you think, oh yeah, we knew there were women. And so I think the good thing about the fourth choir for you or Donne for me is like the moment your eyes open is really fun, because this goes like, whoa, you start seeing it everywhere, and then everywhere I go, and then you talk to a person. It's really nice because you plant that seed. I was talking to another friend the other day, and he said, oh, funnily enough, I got this calendar somebody sent to me, like a music for each day of the year, no music by women in 365 days. I was appalled. And it's really nice because, oh, finally, yes, because we spent so many years not noticing. And I think thank you so much for being part, and for talking to me, and for helping me learn more. Yes, Andrea.
Yeah, but just to say, I hope you you might like this. I've just these last 3 weeks, I've just been chairing exams at the Royal Welsh College, and I think it was violin, voice, and piano. And I must say, the amount of women composers that people were performing, I mean, okay, it wasn't 50-50, but it was extraordinary, actually, to see how many young women and men who were engaged in how important it was to include women composers within their programs. So I just thought that was great. You know, so it's obviously, that's not something, I don't think it's a stipulation of the actual exam requirements, but it's clearly something that is absolutely at the front of people's minds, you know, here and now.
Good. So you should be. You still have to catch up. Well, thank you so much. I have a lot to catch up. Anyway, I think the more important thing is not to relax, because I think what I feel that there are moments when everybody thinks, and that's for everything, diversity, inclusion, equality, people think, okay, we achieved that now, and then they kind of relax, and that's not really the case. It has to be a constant work, because we are not there. And I think now, after the pandemic, you know, the smaller communities are suffering even more with everything. So thank you for being part of this conversation, and for helping me and all of us to understand more. What's next for the fourth choir? Really quickly, we're at 10 minutes over.
Well, we're going to be, we're going to try to do some concerts legally, so, and under the boundaries of,
for the illegal concerts.
Amazing.
Please sign here.
It's like, but the coolest thing that we have coming up is in October. We're going to do a joint concert with 5 deaf performers, and we're going to do a commission with a deaf poet and Kate Whiteley. So we're going to do an event which is equally, equally enjoyable and accessible to both the deaf world and the hearing world. So that's the big thing that we're gearing up for, which is like another exploration for us about inclusivity.
That's amazing. That sounds amazing. Keep us posted. So I'm gonna, the the web address of the choir is already on the description of this video anyway. Anything else you would like to share? Yes, just to say that my next project is that I'm a musical director of a new commission by Erilyn Wallen, and it's in
in partnership with Grey Eye Theatre Company, which is probably the leading disabled theatre company in the UK, and with singers from the Royal Opera House and the English National Opera. It's an opera, a chamber opera, which is based on the life of Theresia von Paradis, who lived during the time of Mozart, Haydn, around that sort of 18th century, late 18th century, and was a